Some people only recognize authority after they've insulted it. Flight 728 to San Diego had been in the air for just under 2 hours when the first hard jolt sent coffee across tray tables and turned polite conversation into sudden silence. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied, but the calm inside the aircraft was already gone. A second drop followed, sharper this time, enough to pull gasps from passengers and tighten every hand around every armrest. Outside the windows, the afternoon sky had changed from clear blue to a wall of dark cloud that looked like it had risen out of nowhere. Overhead bins rattled. Seatbelt signs glowed bright red. Somewhere near row 14, a child began to cry. Claire Donovan moved fast through the aisle with the practiced smile of someone trained to stay composed no matter what. She was 32, polished, efficient, and proud of how many emergencies she had handled without losing control. But this was different. She could feel it in the tension of the crew, in the quick whispers coming from the galley, in the glance the senior attendant gave her before turning away too quickly. Something serious was happening. "Remain seated, folks, seatbelts tight," Claire said, her voice clear but thinner than usual. "We're experiencing temporary turbulence." Temporary. Even she didn't believe that word. The aircraft shuddered again, long enough to make several passengers shout. Plastic cups rolled down the aisle. A businessman in first class demanded answers no one had. An older couple held hands in silence. And in seat 22A, beside the window, one passenger had not moved at all. She was a black woman in a navy hoodie, head resting lightly against the seat, eyes closed as if she were sleeping through the chaos. No panic. No questions. No reaching for the call button. Just stillness. Claire noticed her earlier when boarding. Economy seat, no designer luggage, no attempt to chat, no visible concern for status or comfort. The kind of traveler people overlooked in seconds. Yet now, while everyone else was unraveling, she looked untouched by fear. Claire felt irritation rise faster than reason. She pushed through the aisle and stopped. Beside row 22 just as another violent tremor shook the plane. She snapped. No response. Claire leaned closer. Wake up. The woman slowly opened her eyes. They were steady, alert, and strangely calm, as if she had been awake the entire time. "This is an emergency," Claire said, louder now, aware of nearby passengers watching. "You need to cooperate." The woman blinked once and looked toward the wing, then toward the ceiling panels, listening to something no one else seemed to hear. "How long has that vibration been there?" she asked quietly. Claire frowned. "Excuse me." Another shake rolled through the aircraft. Oxygen masks did not drop, but several people screamed anyway. The woman's gaze shifted toward the front of the plane. "Left engine spool sounds uneven," she said. "And your hydraulic response is lagging." Claire stared at her, stunned less by the words than by the certainty behind them. "You need to stay in your seat and let professionals handle this," Claire said, trying to recover control. The woman unbuckled slowly, deliberate and unhurried. "That," she replied, rising to her feet, "is exactly what I'm trying to do." From the galley, a crew member rushed forward, pale-faced and breathless. "Claire," he said, barely above a whisper, "the captain needs anyone on board with military flight command experience. Now." The aisle went silent. Claire turned back toward the woman in 22A. She was already reaching into her carry-on bag. Nearby passengers leaned forward, sensing something had changed. The woman removed a slim leather case, opened it, and held up an identification badge that made the color drain from Claire's face. Then, in a voice calm enough to quiet the entire cabin, she said, "Commander Avery Jackson. United States Navy. Top Gun instructor." For one suspended second, no one in row 22 moved. The crying child stopped. The businessman who had demanded answers stared with his mouth half open. Even the rattling cabin seemed quieter after those words. Claire Donovan felt heat rush to her face as every sharp sentence she had spoken replayed in her mind. Commander Avery Jackson did not raise her voice, did not smirk, did not seek revenge in the eyes of the people around her. She simply closed the badge case and looked toward the front of the aircraft like a person already measuring distance, time, and consequence. Another hard tremor rolled through the plane, reminding everyone that embarrassment was the smallest problem on board. "With me," Claire said quickly, but the confidence in her tone had vanished. Avery stepped into the aisle and braced one hand lightly against the overhead seats as the aircraft swayed. She moved with an ease that did not match the chaos around her, the kind of balance learned through years inside machines that shook harder than this one. Claire led her forward past rows of frightened passengers. Faces turned as they passed. Some people looked relieved. Others looked ashamed for reasons they could not name. Near the galley, the senior attendant, Careless, met them with a pale expression and sweat on his forehead. "Captain Reyes needs help now," he said. "First officer collapsed 10 minutes ago. He is conscious again, but disoriented." Avery's eyes sharpened. "Medical cause? Possible dehydration, maybe more. We do not know. Autopilot status." Mark blinked. "Still engaged." "Still is not a status," Avery said calmly. "Is it holding heading? Altitude? Are there warning tones?" Mark swallowed. "Yes. Some." She nodded once. "Then we move." Claire opened the cockpit door after a coded knock. The moment it swung inward, the calm mask of commercial aviation disappeared. Warning chimes pulsed through the cramped space. Panels glowed amber and red. Captain Daniel Reyes sat rigid in the left seat, hands tight on the controls, jaw clenched with concentration. In the right seat, the first officer leaned back, color drained from his face, breathing shallow but steady. Reyes looked over his shoulder, irritation ready on his face until he saw Avery's badge in Claire's hand. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Commander Avery Jackson," Claire said, her voice nearly breaking. "Naval Aviation." Reyes stared for half a beat, then shifted instantly from pride to practicality. "Good. Sit down." Avery slid into the jump seat behind them and scanned the instruments in silence. Her eyes moved quickly, not rushed. Crosswind stronger than forecast. Left engine response delayed but stable. Hydraulic B pressure fluctuating. You are overcorrecting rudder input by half a second. Captain Reyes blinked. No one had spoken to him that directly in years. "Can you assist or critique?" he asked. "Both," Avery replied. "Because right now you need both." Another drop hit the aircraft. The nose dipped, then recovered. In the cabin, screams rose and faded. Avery leaned forward. "Listen carefully, Captain. Reduce manual chase. Let the aircraft settle. Small corrections only. Trust the airframe." Reyes hesitated, then loosened his grip by inches. The control steadied. The warning tone that had been repeating every few seconds went silent. Claire stood frozen near the door, watching a woman she had dismissed 30 minutes earlier bring order into a room full of training, titles, and panic. Avery turned slightly toward her without taking her eyes off the panel. "Claire." It was the first time she had used her name. "Yes?" "Cabin check. Tight belts, heads down where needed, hot liquid secured, and tell them this plane is still flying exactly as it was built to." Claire nodded immediately and hurried out, humbled by how natural authority sounded when it did not need to announce itself. Behind her, Avery studied the storm radar, then pointed to a narrow opening between two dense cells of weather. "Captain Reyes," she said, voice calm as stone, "if you trust me for the next 4 minutes, I can get you through that gap." Captain Daniel Reyes had spent 21 years in the air, and in all that time he had learned one lesson above every other: storms punish ego first. He looked at the narrow opening on the radar screen, a thin lane of darker green between two violent bands of red and amber, then looked back at Commander Avery Jackson. Her face showed no strain, no need to impress, only focus. The aircraft trembled again, lighter this time, as if even the sky were waiting for his answer. "You have control guidance," Reyes said. It was not a phrase found in any airline manual, but everyone in the cockpit understood what he meant. Avery leaned forward, one hand braced behind the seats, eyes fixed on the instruments. Maintain current altitude for 30 seconds. Reduce correction input by 10%. Let the nose breathe. Reyes obeyed. For the first time in several minutes, the controls felt less like a fight and more like a conversation. The warning tones that had dominated the cockpit began to space farther apart. In the cabin, Claire Donovan moved row by row with new urgency and a new humility. She tightened loose belts, secured laptops, collected cups, and repeated the words Avery had given her. This plane is still flying exactly as it was built to. At first, passengers heard only reassurance. Then they heard confidence. Panic softened into tense silence. A father stopped whispering apologies to his son. The older couple in row 6 loosened their death grip on each other's hands. Even the businessman in first class lowered his voice and stared out the window instead of demanding answers. Claire felt people studying her differently now, but she barely noticed. Her mind kept returning to the woman in row 22, the woman she had judged in seconds and misunderstood completely. Back in the cockpit, Avery watched the engine data stabilize by degrees. "Good," she said quietly. "Now 5 degrees right. Hold it. We enter the gap in 12 seconds. Captain Reyes followed her timing exactly. The aircraft angled gently. Rain hammered the fuselage, then suddenly lessened. A bright slash of daylight appeared ahead through the windshield like a curtain parting. The cabin noise changed first. The deep groaning rattle that had filled the plane gave way to a smoother rush of air. Then the shaking eased. Then eased again. First Officer Neil Harper, still pale, lifted his head and looked around in disbelief. "Did we clear it?" he asked weakly. "Not yet," Avery said. "But now we can." Her eyes never left the panel. "Hydraulic pressure is returning. Left engine spool normalized. Captain, contact dispatch and request priority descent into San Diego. We do not gamble twice." Reyes almost smiled. "Yes, m." Claire heard the captain's voice over the intercom moments later, steadier than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. Conditions are improving. We expect a safe arrival shortly." Safe. The word moved through the cabin like warm air. People exhaled together. Some laughed from pure relief. Others wiped tears they hoped strangers had not seen. Claire stood near row 22 and looked at the now empty seat where Avery had been sitting when this all began. A paperback novel remained tucked in the seat pocket. A pair of reading glasses rested neatly on the tray table. Ordinary objects. That somehow made the lesson sharper. Greatness had boarded quietly. It had not asked for attention. It had simply waited until needed. 10 minutes later the cloud cover broke completely, revealing the California coastline below, silver under late afternoon sun. Applause started somewhere near the rear and spread forward in waves. Captain Reyes guided the aircraft lower, calmer now, while Avery finally sat back in the jump seat for the first time. She rolled one shoulder, breathed once, and closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Then she opened them again. "One more thing, Captain," she said. "When we land, your passengers will thank the uniform in front. Make sure you also thank the crew behind. Fear is hardest in the cabin." Reyes nodded slowly. "And what about you?" Avery looked out the windshield at the runway lights beginning to glow in the distance. "I was just a passenger," she said. The wheels touched the runway with a firm, clean thump that sounded more beautiful than music. A second later came the long rush of reverse thrust, then the steady deceleration that told every person on board the same thing at once: they were home. For a moment no one spoke, as if the cabin needed proof that the danger had truly passed. Then applause erupted from the back rows and rolled forward like thunder. Some passengers laughed through tears. Others bowed their heads in silent gratitude. The child in row 14 shouted, "We made it," and the whole plane smiled with him. Claire Donovan stood near the galley, one hand pressed lightly against the wall, breathing harder than she wanted anyone to notice. During training they had spoken often about procedures, tone, posture, and professionalism. They had not spoken enough about shame. Shame arrived quietly, after the crisis, when there was time to replay your own voice and hear what others had heard all along. She remembered every sharp word she had thrown at Avery Jackson. Every assumption hidden inside polite language. Every second she believed authority had to look a certain way, dress a certain way, sit in a certain cabin. The aircraft turned off the runway and taxied slowly toward the gate. Outside the windows, airport vehicles moved beneath golden evening light. Inside, passengers began collecting bags with the shaky energy of people returning from something they would describe for years. Captain Daniel Reyes came over the intercom again, his tone warm and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Diego. On behalf of the crew, thank you for your patience and cooperation today. We also owe a special debt of gratitude to a passenger whose extraordinary skill and calm helped us navigate difficult conditions." Heads turned instantly toward the front, then down the aisles, searching. Avery was already standing beside row 22, lifting her carry-on from beneath the seat as if she had merely woken from a nap and reached the end of an ordinary trip. She did not wave. She did not stand taller. She simply nodded once to the nearest passengers who now stared at her with open admiration. An older man removed his baseball cap as she passed. A young woman whispered, "Thank you." The businessman from first class stepped into the aisle to let her through and could not meet her eyes. Claire felt her throat tighten. She walked toward Avery slowly, each step heavier than the turbulence had been. Around them, the cabin noise softened. People sensed something personal was about to happen. "Commander Jackson," Claire said, then stopped. Avery looked at her, patient but unreadable. "I owe you an apology." Claire swallowed hard. "Before any of this happened, I judged you. I spoke to you with disrespect. I was wrong." She expected anger, or at least the cool satisfaction of being proven right. Instead, Avery studied her for a long second, then glanced toward the passengers still gathering there. "Things today frightened everyone," she said quietly. "Fear often reveals habits we thought were harmless." Claire lowered her eyes. "I understand that now." Avery adjusted the strap on her bag. "Understanding is a start. Change is better." There was no cruelty in the words, which made them land deeper. Claire nodded, unable to defend herself because there was nothing left to defend. The jet bridge connected with a hollow clunk. The cabin door opened. Warm California air drifted in. Passengers began filing out, many pausing to thank Avery as they passed. She answered each one with the same simple grace, never taking more credit than necessary. Captain Reyes emerged from the cockpit and crossed the cabin in full uniform. In front of everyone, he stopped beside Avery and offered a firm handshake. "You saved more than a schedule today," he said. "You reminded me what command looks like." Avery smiled faintly. "Command is just service with responsibility." Then she turned to leave. At the doorway she paused and looked back once at Claire, who still stood in the aisle carrying the weight of a lesson no manual had taught her. "Next time," Avery said gently, "wake people with respect." Then she stepped into the evening light, and somehow the cabin felt quieter after she was gone. By the time the last passenger stepped off the aircraft, the sun had dropped low enough to turn the windows gold. The cabin that had been filled with fear an hour earlier now held only wrappers, forgotten magazines, and the quiet exhaustion that follows survival. Claire Donovan moved slowly through the aisle collecting loose items, but her hands were distracted. She kept seeing Avery Jackson disappear down the jet bridge without celebration, without waiting for praise, carrying herself the same way she had carried herself before anyone knew her name. Some people changed the room when they entered it. Others changed it when they left. Captain Daniel Reyes remained near the cockpit speaking with airline operations through a headset, giving calm summaries now that calm had returned. Mechanics would inspect the aircraft. Reports would be filed. Schedules would shift. Procedures would be reviewed. Institutions were good at documenting events. They were less skilled at documenting humility. Claire bent to retrieve the paperback Avery had left in seat 22. A bookmark rested halfway through the pages. On the inside cover was a small handwritten line in neat ink, "Stay teachable. No rank-outrun's arrogance." Claire stared at it longer than she meant to. She did not know whether the note was meant for herself months ago or for anyone who might someday need it. Either way, it had found the right person. Mark Ellis entered from the forward galley carrying 2 bottles of water. "You all right?" he asked. Claire gave the kind of smile people use when the truth is complicated. "I will be." He nodded toward the book in her hand. "You know, I almost did the same thing you did." Claire looked up. "What do you mean?" "When she boarded, I assumed retired professor. Maybe lawyer. Definitely not the person who would guide us through weather and save my job from becoming a headline." He offered 1 bottle. "Bias wears nicer clothes than people think." Claire accepted the water in silence. Those words stayed with her as she finished the cabin sweep. Later, in the crew lounge, a supervisor thanked everyone for professionalism under pressure. Claire nearly laughed at the word. Professionalism had landed the plane. Character had entered in row 22. When the debrief ended, she asked for 5 minutes alone on board before the cleaners came through. The supervisor agreed. She walked back into the empty cabin and stood beside seat 22 again. The evening light stretched across the armrests and carpet in long quiet lines. It looked ordinary now. That was the strange part. Life-changing moments rarely announced themselves with music. Sometimes they happened between a drink cart and a window seat. Claire sat where Avery had Saturday. She tried to imagine hearing panic all around you and choosing stillness. Tried to imagine carrying expertise so great that it could save strangers, yet wearing it so lightly no one could see it. She failed at both. Then she noticed something tucked inside the seat pocket behind the safety card. A folded napkin. She opened it carefully. Written in the same neat hand were 6 words: "Respect should arrive before credentials do." Claire closed her eyes. There it was. No lecture. No public punishment. No revenge. Just truth, placed gently enough that it had to be chosen. She slipped the note into her pocket. The next morning she arrived early for work and asked to be reassigned to boarding instead of premium cabin service. She greeted each passenger with a steadier voice than usual. Elderly travelers, nervous flyers, families with too many bags, young men in work boots, women in hoodies, business executives, college students. She looked each one in the eye. No sorting. No guessing. No invisible ladder in her mind. Midway through boarding, a teenage girl hesitated near the door, clutching a worn backpack and looking embarrassed by it. Claire smiled warmly and took the bag for the overhead bin. "Welcome aboard," she said. "We are glad you are here." The girl's shoulders relaxed instantly. Such a small change. Such a powerful one. Somewhere above another set of clouds, Avery Jackson was likely already on another flight, another mission, another quiet seat where no one knew who sat beside them. And somewhere inside Claire, a different journey had just begun. 3 weeks passed, and Flight 728 became one more incident folded into company reports, maintenance summaries, and stories passengers told at dinner tables. But for Claire Donovan, it did not fade. Some moments do not remain because they were dramatic. They remain because they reveal who you were before they changed you. She noticed the difference in herself in dozens of small places. She listened longer. She interrupted less. She stopped deciding who mattered by shoes, seats, watches, accents, or confidence. She learned that courtesy given equally feels different from courtesy given selectively. On a rainy Thursday morning, Claire reported for a routine route from Los Angeles to Norfolk with a stop in Dallas. The terminal smelled of coffee and wet pavement drifting in through automatic doors. Travelers hurried past screens and rolling luggage, carrying the private weight of their own lives. Claire stood at the boarding gate greeting passengers one Buy one. Good morning. Welcome aboard. Take your time. The words were the same as always, but now she meant them individually. Halfway through boarding, she noticed a woman standing several feet back from the line. Mid-40s, dark coat, baseball cap, travel tote, no attempt to draw attention. The woman waited until nearly everyone had boarded before stepping forward. Claire felt recognition before certainty. The calm posture. The unhurried eyes. The way silence seemed intentional rather than shy. "Good morning," Claire said softly. The woman smiled. "Good morning, Claire." It was Avery Jackson. No badge. No uniform. No dramatic entrance. Just another passenger holding a boarding pass. Claire felt surprise, gratitude, and embarrassment arrive all at once. "Commander Jackson," she said. Avery tilted her head. "Today I am just Avery." Claire smiled despite herself. "Window or aisle?" "Whichever seat lets me read in peace." Claire scanned the pass. 14A. She lowered her voice. "I am glad to see you again." Avery studied her for a second, then nodded toward the cabin. "You seem different." Claire exhaled a small laugh. "I am trying to be." Avery stepped onto the aircraft, then paused. Trying counts more than pretending. During boarding, Claire watched her settle into 14A beside an elderly veteran who struggled with his cane. Before Claire could reach them, Avery had already lifted his bag, adjusted the air vent for him, and asked if he needed water. No performance. No need to be seen helping. Just help. Mid-flight, weather remained clear and smooth. The veteran in 14B began talking proudly about his years in the Navy. Claire passed by with beverages and caught pieces of the conversation. "Served on carriers," the man said. "Nothing glamorous. Just did my part." Avery smiled warmly. Those decks carried more heroes than most people know. The man chuckled. "And what did you do?" Avery took a sip of coffee. "I flew where they sent me." Claire nearly laughed out loud. Even now, she carried greatness like a folded note in a pocket. Later, when the cabin lights dimmed, Claire stopped beside row 14. "Can I get you anything?" she asked. Avery looked up from her book. "Yes." Claire straightened instantly. "Anything." Avery glanced toward the rows behind them, where a tired mother bounced a restless toddler while juggling snacks and a diaper bag. "Help her first." Claire followed the gaze and nodded. "Of course." As she walked away, the lesson landed again. Real authority does not compete for service. It directs it outward. After landing in Dallas, passengers stood and reached for bags. The veteran in 14B turned to Avery. "You remind me of the best officers I ever knew," he said. "They never had to announce themselves." Avery smiled. "That is because titles are for paperwork. Character is for people." Claire heard every word. At the open door, Avery paused before stepping into the jet bridge. "You were kind today before knowing anyone's story," she said. "That is growth." Claire felt her eye sting unexpectedly. "I still have more to learn." Avery adjusted her tote bag and gave the same calm smile she had worn through storms and silence alike. "Good," she said. "People who think they are finished usually are." Then she disappeared into the moving crowd, and Claire returned to the cabin carrying no badge, no rank, and yet something far more useful than either. Months passed, and people who worked beside Claire Donovan began noticing something they could not name at first. She was still efficient, still polished, still quick with schedules and safety checks. But the edge that once separated passengers into categories had disappeared. She no longer greeted first class with warmth and economy with routine courtesy. She greeted everyone like a person carrying a story she had not earned the right to judge. Some co-workers praised the change. Others teased it. "You are becoming a philosopher in a uniform," Mark Ellis joked one afternoon while they stocked service carts. Claire smiled. No. Just slower to assume. The company soon selected her for a leadership development seminar in Norfolk, a weekend program for senior cabin crew. The sessions covered crisis communication, conflict management, and passenger care. Speakers used slides, statistics, and polished language. Claire listened respectfully, but one truth kept. Returning to her, the most important lesson she had learned did not come from a conference room. It came from row 22 at 30,000 feet. On the final afternoon, participants were divided into groups and asked to solve a simulated emergency scenario. A facilitator described engine warnings, anxious passengers, delayed information, and crew tension. Voices around Claire's table rose quickly. One attendant argued for stronger commands. Another insisted on controlling optics first. Someone else blamed pilots for poor communication. Claire stayed quiet until the facilitator asked for her recommendation. She spoke calmly. First, lower the emotional temperature. Fear spreads faster than facts. Second, identify actual expertise in the room instead of assuming where it sits. Third, speak to people with dignity before you need their cooperation. The room went still. The facilitator leaned forward. Where did you learn that? Claire paused, then answered honestly. From making the opposite mistake. After the seminar, she walked through the terminal toward her departure gate carrying a folder of notes she knew she would barely use. The airport buzzed with rolling bags, gate announcements, and reunions that lasted seconds but looked like years. Near a large window overlooking the tarmac, she saw a familiar figure seated alone with a coffee and an open book. Avery Jackson. No cap this time. No disguise of ordinariness, though she had never needed one. She wore a simple grey jacket and looked out at departing aircraft with the relaxed attention of someone who still loved the sky. Claire approached slowly. You keep appearing at airports like a lesson I have not finished learning. Avery looked up and laughed softly. And you keep improving enough that I do not mind repeating myself. Claire sat beside her after a nod of invitation. For a moment they watched a narrow-body jet push back from the gate. I used your words today, Claire said. About respect arriving before credentials. Avery sipped her coffee. They were never mine alone. Someone taught them to me after I made my own mistakes. Claire turned, surprised. You? Avery smiled at the reaction. Do not confuse calm with perfection. I was once young, talented, and far too impressed with myself. The sky corrects that quickly. Claire laughed, then grew thoughtful. Why did you help me after the way I treated you? Avery closed her book. Because the plane needed help. Because passengers needed help. And because punishing ignorance rarely teaches as much as confronting it with grace. The boarding announcement for Avery's flight sounded overhead. She stood and lifted her tote bag. Claire rose with her. Will I see you again? She asked. Avery considered the crowded terminal, the strangers crossing paths beneath departure boards and fluorescent light. Airports are full of people between who they were and who they are becoming, she said. That makes them good places to meet. She extended her hand. Claire took it firmly. One more thing, Avery added. Do not spend your life ashamed of who you were. Spend it proving you are no longer her. Then she walked toward gate 19, blending into the moving crowd with the same quiet power she always carried. Claire stood by the window long after Avery disappeared, watching planes rise one by one into open sky, understanding that altitude is not the same thing as growth. Nearly a year after the storm, Claire Donovan stood at the front of a training room wearing the same uniform she once believed gave her authority. Now she knew better. Authority could be issued. Respect had to be earned. In front of her sat 20 new flight attendants, bright-eyed, nervous, eager to memorize procedures and say the right things. Their notebooks were open. Their smiles were polished. They reminded Claire of herself before life corrected her in public and then offered mercy in private. A projector screen behind her displayed the title of the session, Passenger Care Under Pressure. The company expected her to teach service standards, conflict response, and emergency communication. She would do all of that. But she intended to teach something more useful. You will learn safety commands, Claire began. You will learn equipment locations, evacuation steps, medical basics, and how to stay calm when others cannot. Those things matter. But if you fail at seeing people clearly, you will fail long before any emergency begins. Pens paused. Heads lifted. She walked slowly across the room. Passengers will board wearing signals you think you understand. Expensive suits. Worn shoes. Designer bags. Work boots. Loud confidence. Quiet discomfort. Do not confuse signals with truth. A young trainee raised his hand. How do we know who may need extra attention? Claire smiled gently. Everyone. Soft laughter moved through the room, then settled into thought. She divided them into practice groups and gave each team scenarios. A nervous flyer snapping at staff. A tired parent overwhelmed with children. An elderly traveler embarrassed to ask for help. A silent passenger who appears disengaged. Claire watched closely as teams responded. Most did well until they reached the silent passenger. Several assumed hostility. Others assumed ignorance. One trainee described the passenger as a likely problem before saying a word to them. Claire stopped the exercise. Interesting, she said. You built a full story from silence. The room quieted. Silence may mean fear, grief, exhaustion, discipline, wisdom, or nothing at all. If you assign motives before asking questions, you are not reading people. You are reading yourself. By the end of the session, the trainees looked less polished and more prepared. That was progress. As they packed up, a young woman named Elena lingered behind. Can I ask something personal? She said. Of course. Elena hesitated. Did you always know these things? Claire laughed softly. No. I learned them after failing at them. She considered saying more, then chose honesty over mystery. I once misjudged a passenger because she did not fit the picture in my head of who mattered. That same passenger later saved an aircraft full of people. Elena's eyes widened. What did you do? I apologized, Claire said. Then I changed. That afternoon Claire worked a short route to Phoenix. During boarding, she noticed a woman in casual clothes entering last, carrying a duffel bag and wearing noise-cancelling headphones around her neck. Several passengers ahead of her looked impatient as she adjusted the strap. Claire stepped forward, lifted the bag gently, and smiled. Take your time. Welcome aboard. The woman looked surprised, then grateful. She settled into 18C without fuss. Mid-flight, a medical call came from row 18. The same woman calmly identified herself as an emergency room physician and helped a fainting passenger until paramedics met the plane on arrival. Claire did not feel shock this time. Only confirmation. At deplaning, the doctor paused by the door. Thank you for treating me like I belonged before you knew anything about me, she said. Claire felt warmth rise in her chest. You did belong, she answered. You always did. That evening, alone in the empty cabin, Claire looked down the aisle lined with identical seats where strangers had laughed, panicked, judged, forgiven, and changed. She thought of Avery Jackson somewhere above another cloud line, carrying quiet excellence into another ordinary day. Some people save planes. Some save people from becoming smaller versions of themselves. And once in a rare while, someone does both. 5 years after the storm, Claire Donovan stood beneath a wide blue sky on the edge of a naval air station in Virginia. The invitation in her hand was simple, printed on clean white cardstock. Aviation Leadership Symposium. Guest speaker, Commander Avery Jackson. Claire had read the line 3 times before believing it. She had not seen Avery in person since the airport terminal years earlier, though the lessons never stopped arriving. They appeared each time she greeted a difficult passenger with patience, each time she corrected a coworker quietly, each time she chose curiosity over judgment. Some teachers never enter a classroom. They enter your conscience. The event was held in a hangar transformed into an auditorium of folding chairs, flags, and polished aircraft positioned like monuments to discipline. Pilots, cadets, airline crews, students, and veterans filled the seats. Claire felt oddly nervous, as if she were the one being evaluated. On stage stood a podium and a large screen showing photographs of aircraft slicing through cloud banks. Then Avery walked out to applause that rose instantly and sincerely. Time had changed little except to sharpen her presence. She carried herself the same way she always had, steady enough to calm a room without asking it to be quiet. She thanked the audience, then began speaking not about medals, missions, or rank, but about responsibility. People think pressure reveals character, she said. Sometimes it does. But more often pressure reveals habits. Character is what you build before the pressure comes. Claire smiled to herself. It sounded exactly like her. Or rather, exactly like the person Claire had become by listening. Avery spoke of teamwork, humility, discipline, and the danger of mistaking confidence for competence. She described leadership as service that accepts consequences first and credit last. She told stories of mistakes she had made early in her career and what they cost her pride. No grandstanding. No mythology. Just truth spoken plainly enough to trust. During the question session, a young cadet asked how to command respect in rooms full of doubt. Avery paused before answering. Do the work so consistently that doubt gets tired, she said, and laughter rolled through the crowd. Then she added, but remember this too. You do not need every room to believe in you. You only need to remain worthy of belief. After the event, people formed a long line for handshakes and photographs. Claire waited near the back, unsure whether Avery would remember her after all these years and all the lives she must have crossed. When her turn came, Avery looked up, smiled immediately, and said, "You are still standing straighter." Claire laughed in surprise. "And you are still reading people faster than radar." They embraced warmly, no awkwardness left between them. Nearby attendees politely pretended not to notice tears in Claire's eyes. They walked outside together where jets rested silent in the afternoon sun. "I wanted to thank you," Claire said. "For more than the flight. For what happened after." Avery looked across the runway. "You did the harder part. You changed." Claire shook her head. "Because you gave me grace when embarrassment would have been easier." Avery turned to her. "Grace is not softness. It is strategy. Shame can freeze people inside their worst moment. Grace invites movement." They stood in companionable silence as a training jet roared overhead and climbed into bright open air. Claire finally asked the question she had carried for years. "Why were you sleeping so calmly that day?" Avery laughed, full and genuine. "I was not sleeping. I was listening." Claire stared, then burst into laughter herself. "You heard everything I said? Every word. And still you helped me." Avery's smile softened. "The plane needed landing. You needed landing too." Evening light stretched long across the runway. They parted with promises to stay in touch this time and meant it. As Claire walked toward the parking lot, she looked back once more at the woman who had first seemed like an ordinary passenger in an ordinary seat. The greatest mistake she ever made had become the greatest gift she ever received. Because some people carry titles. Others carry truth. And when the storm comes, truth always flies higher.